Welcome to the Wildcard Rewind podcast. This week we're talking about the AFC and NFC East. Let's get into it.
I just wanna rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
So, hello and welcome in. We're carrying on with our divisional previews this week. As I said, on to the East divisions. It's just two of us today, the best two, some would say. So it's just me and Hannah. Hannah, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Lewis. I think everyone would say the best two, to be honest, but let's not tell Paul that. And it is his birthday, so maybe I should go a bit easier on him, right? Although he's not here, so it's a perfect chance.
It is his birthday, which is obviously the biggest of all of the big news. Is that Paul turns 56 today, and we're very excited for him. Happy birthday, Paul! I hope he's having a lovely day, and obviously, and a year closer to retirement, beckoning relatively soon, Paul.
I'll be dead happy with that.
I don't think he will be. I'm in a slightly different location today, so I've spruced up my background a little bit, and you can see my little Aaron Donald figurine. If you're watching on video rather than listening on audio, I've got a little Aaron Donald figurine behind me, celebrating the greatest defensive player of all time. And I've also got a towel that's actually from the Rams-Bengals Super Bowl that I managed to get a contact in LA to send over for me, which is maybe my prized possession, actually being one of the towels from on the seats in the Super Bowl that we won. And I did think about this as I laid it out nicely in front of me. It did feel a little bit like I was sort of rubbing that in your face, because it does say in big letters sort of Rams, Bengals, Los Angeles versus Cincinnati, whether it might bring back any painful memories for you having that on display right in front of me.
I know. I feel offended, to be honest, Lewis, and like you're goading me on purpose. I'm still really upset about that Super Bowl. We totally should have won that, but we couldn't get the ball to chase. So, it is what it is. But I'm still heartbroken. I fear that our one chance at getting the Super Bowl in kind of recent times has fluttered away, and that's the end of us. We're going to be mediocre for ages again now, probably.
Well, this very much isn't on the docket for today, but I think this is probably the last window now that you've had Burrow's already been paid. Ja'Marr Chase will need to be paid next offseason. You've got T. Higgins on the tag, so this is probably his last season in Cincinnati. This is like the idea behind the Super Bowl window is that you obviously hit on those 3 draft picks 2 years in a row. So Burrow and Higgins were the same draft year, weren't they? Yeah. And then Ja'Marr Chase the year afterwards. So you managed to hit on those 2 classes. And you think, okay, well, they're cost controlled. Now we can go and pursue a Super Bowl. And this is probably the end of the window, I'd say. Although with, a superstar quarterback at the helm, the window is probably never fully closed.
Yeah, I just think, like you say, things are going to change now, and they have to draft well. I mean, they've had to draft well the last few seasons generally, as we know that his massive contract was coming up, but it's even more important now that they draft well, and we really need some of these draft picks to hit. And I'm not sure whether we've done a good enough job, but we'll see.
We will see. And talking about Joe Burrow's massive extension, that does bring us on to our big news of the week, which is that we now have a second highest paid quarterback in the NFL. A new second highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions secured a gigantic extension, so $212 million over 4 years, which is a $53 million average. He secured the largest ever signing bonus of $73 million. I'd love to know your initial thoughts on this deal. I have some thoughts.
Good on him, right? Jared Goff bet on himself. Basically, the Lions paid to take on his contract. What was it, 4 years ago now?
Yeah.
Is it that long ago? Wow.
Might be 3.
Was it 3?
Yeah.
Anyway, 3 or 4 years ago, and he was basically thrown onto the scrap heap, wasn't he? Everyone was like, well, nobody wants him. He's crap. Off you go. And I think he's done a really great job of building back his reputation, to be honest. And he's done a really nice job there. But can we say that he is in the top, is he elite QB? No. Is he a game changer? No. So it seems like a lot of money for a guy that isn't going to put you over the top. He's not going to put the team on his shoulders, and win a game. He needs everything to be right around him, which they've done an amazing job of doing that and putting everything around him. But I just think it's a lot of money for a guy that isn't in the stratosphere, I don't think, of Joe Burrow, Mahomes, Allen, kind of thing. I think they pinned themselves into a corner because they're doing too well. They obviously drafted Hendon Hooker. They clearly don't think he's a successor. Where they're going to get their QB from, I think that's the problem. And I think they've said to Jared Goff that they appreciate him so much, and they've been really vocal about how much they think Jared Goff is great and they love him and they're so glad he came to the team, that I think that they're struggling to go back on their word now, if you know what I mean. And I think they've kind of painted themselves into a bit of a corner and they've had to pay him. If he had the current offensive coordinator for the lifetime of this 4 years, then I can see it not being worth it, but I can see them continuing to be highly competitive. I'm worried that the OC is going to go and get a head coaching job and everything's going to fall apart next year. And I think that's probably what's going to happen, and they're going to have egg on their face.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. I think so. I share a very similar opinion with you, which is that, and I said this to some people right after it happened, that if only we had a previous example of Jared Goff thriving when everything was perfect around him with a great young offensive mind, getting paid a massive deal, and then seeing how that went afterwards. That's how he ended up on the Lions in the first place, is that the Rams overpaid him too early, and he's a good quarterback. I have nothing against Jared Goff. I actively root for him because I was a big fan of him in his time at the Rams, even if it didn't work out in the end. The problem with Jared Goff is that it has to be perfect. He's not going to absolutely carry a team all the way to the Super Bowl and then to win the Super Bowl. There has to be offensive weapons around him, a fantastic offensive line in front of him, a fantastic offensive coordinator. Obviously, the Lions do have that right now. But the problem is that you do start to hamstring yourself a little bit. They've obviously also paid Amon-Ra this offseason. They'll have the Penei Sewell and Aiden Hutchinson contract extensions coming up. Penei Sewell next offseason.
They've paid Penei Sewell, haven't they? I'm pretty sure
Have
they
they
paid
already?
him. Yeah, him and Amon-Ra. I'm sure I think he became one of the highest defensive tackles paid.
You are right. You are right, yeah. So his cap number in 2026, the way it's structured, his cap number in 2026 goes up to 28 million. No, you are right that they did Penei Sewell this offseason, but they'll still have Aiden Hutchinson. And yeah, I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, I was going to say, but that's not hugely going to hamstring them. And he's only going into his second season. I think I just worry about paying good quarterbacks like they're great quarterbacks. I never think it's a particularly smart way to run a franchise. I think you can just end up a few years down the line going like massively regretting doing it, because you have to have everything perfect around them, which is much easier when they're on a slightly cheaper deal. I'd also be very interested to know the reasoning behind this as to whether or not Jared Goff was actively pushing for, I want to be, the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and they settled on being the second highest paid, or whether they decided to reward Goff, like how those contract talks were structured, as to whether or not it was Goff saying, yeah, I deserve to be, top of the market, or whether it was the Lions going, no, we want you to be top of the market. We think this is what you deserve. Because, if he was on the open market, I don't think he'd get this deal. I don't think he'd get he'd get a lot of interest, but he wouldn't get, top of the market level interest. I don't think anyway.
No, I mean, I would suspect that he was pushing for that, right? I can't imagine them going, oh, we want to make you the second highest paid quarterback, because they're going to want some leeway with, cap, etc. So I suspect, I'd be surprised if they wanted to pay him that. I suspect he pushed for that. And, they're in a corner, similar to a quarterback we're going to be talking about soon. The problem is they're too good for them to be able to draft, you know, a decent rookie QB without giving up significant assets, which also hamstrings them in the future. So it's kind of, which is the lesser of two evils, you know, and obviously they've chosen at this point Jared Goff, rightly or wrongly. And it'll just be interesting to see how things go. I think they felt that they couldn't not offer him an extension after they got to the NFC Championship game last year. Like, how can they then turn around and say you're not good enough? You know, I think it's so difficult to do that.
Yeah,
and so
well, I
they
mean,
ended up in a tricky situation.
The Rams did it, 2 seasons after getting to the Super Bowl, realized that they were never quite going to get over the hump with Jared Goff. But I mean, it will be interesting to see how it plays out. But you are right that it leads us on quite naturally to our main segment, which is our divisional previews. So we're going to start off with the AFC East. Which is obviously the Bills, Dolphins, Patriots, and Jets. This is a really competitive division. It should be, you would imagine, 3 playoff teams and one that have just got the new quarterback of the future. So even though the roster isn't great, there's going to be a lot of room to develop with them. But the Bills, Dolphins, and the Jets, that's 3 fantastic teams with 3, one absolutely elite quarterback, one quarterback who was elite a few years ago, and who knows how he'll be after the ACL or Achilles, sorry. And then one quarterback who I want to start off by talking about, and that's sort of the lead in. Tua Tagovailoa is a really interesting one, who is the only one of that class who hasn't got an extension yet. And that actually doesn't just include the others that were taken in the top 6 with him, which was obviously Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. Jordan Love later on in the first round has also got an extension, and Jalen Hurts in the second round has also got an extension. All of them absolutely market setting. Jordan Love obviously slightly different because he didn't play for the first 3 years. Tua, it's being reported today that he will attend OTAs, and he's not intending holding out, but do you think, let's start off by thinking about his contract situation. Do you think he gets an extension with the Dolphins? And do you think he should get an extension with the Dolphins?
So I think this is exactly the same situation as the Lions, in that they've kind of pinned themselves into a bit of a corner, really. They've built this offense not around him, but to kind of try and cover him up, if you know what I mean, and work to what his strengths are. So, and they are competitive. So where they're going to get an alternative quarterback from, and I think that's the issue. I think they're going to have to pay him, and I think they will pay him, because they're not going to feel like they're going to find a quarterback anywhere else. Should they? I don't think so. I mean, this is the same thing as the Jared Goff situation, right? So yes, I would pay him if he doesn't want top of the market money, but he's going to. So no, I won't pay him for what he wants, but I don't think they're going to be able to not. So I think they will.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that I think there's something that goes into this more so than just how does the quarterback play and how can we replicate that play with someone that costs less. There's something when you draft a player about the fact that you've developed them and they're the leader of the franchise, and they've taken the city or the state to heart, and they embed in the culture and the relationship with the OC and the head coach, that I think Tua probably has, which goes beyond how well he's played. And don't get me wrong, I think he's been good. But I think again he's a product of the system, and he's a product of Mike McDaniel. It's very notable that Tua wasn't really coming into these sorts of top end QB conversations until Mike McDaniel came to town. And now suddenly he's got Tyreek Hill, he's got Jalen Waddle this season, he's got OBJ as well. He's got the 2 fastest running backs in the NFL as well. The offense is thriving, and suddenly we're talking about him as one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. But I think they will pay him. I think you could replicate what Tua does very well for quite significantly cheaper. And I think you could probably get that same level of quarterback play in terms of just being able to run the offense without paying $50 million per year. I mean, not that they ever would have done it, but then the team that did do it, we didn't expect to either. Michael Penix as a prospect is a fantastic pocket passer. Not very mobile, with a much stronger arm than Tua Tagovailoa. Do I think he could probably run this offense to the same level? Yeah, I think he probably could. Could they have done it, when they picked towards the back end of the first? No, they wouldn't have. Of course they wouldn't have. But then we thought the Falcons wouldn't. So yeah, I'm not hugely convinced on him. But then how does that lead to your rankings of him for 2024?
I think people get excited about Tua because he's on the Dolphins, and they still are excited about his name. Even though he came out of college like 5 years ago, before he hurt his hip, he was the tank for Tua. Everyone wants Tua, blah, blah, blah. And I still think people kind of think of him in that way, and they think that he's going to suddenly become this elite guy and enter the elite tier. And I think, unfortunately, that is unrealistic at this stage of his career. I think he is what he's going to be. But people seem to get extremely excited and feel that he is a QB1, whereas for me at this stage, I don't actually have him ranked as a QB1.
Yeah.
I currently have him as the QB 15.
Okay.
So in 2023, he only had 6 QB1 finishes, which I was actually quite surprised with. I thought he would have had more, but actually when you think about it, we had these monster games for like Achane, Mostert. So a lot of the scoring was coming from the running backs and not necessarily always related to Tua.
Yeah.
His last top 12 finish last season was in week 13. So in the fantasy playoffs, he was rubbish for you. And he's just really reliant on the environment. Last season, the Dolphins struggled against stronger opponents. We've not actually seen with this Mike McDaniel system that they are able to overcome stronger opponents. So I'm not convinced that they can. So I think he's going to be this up and down QB. So for me, I would prefer to have him as my QB2 in Superflex leagues. I don't really want him as my QB1 or as my only QB in a 1 QB league, because I just don't think he's got the ceiling to be a QB1 on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair enough. And it kind of surprised me when I went to look at the second half of the season, because he finished at QB9. And it felt like the Dolphins offense was pretty unstoppable for a while. But if you just look at the second half of his season, so after the bye, they had a week 10 bye, so weeks 11 through 17, his 17-game pace would have seen him finish at QB 19. Which is behind Geno Smith, behind Derek Carr, behind Sam Howell, behind Russell Wilson. Like, it didn't feel like that because he finished at QB9 in the end. But part of having an offense with such a strong running game, we're worried about Justin Herbert going into next season. And yes, the weapons are much stronger in Miami than they are in LA. But part of the reason we're worried is that we think they're going to run the ball 30 times a game. Why aren't they going to do the same in Miami? Tua obviously has, an elite ceiling because he has these 2 fantastic wide receivers, including probably the best wide receiver in the NFL. So that means that there is a ceiling to him that other quarterbacks don't have, because he can go off for, we've seen Tyreek Hill go for 200 yard games multiple times. I think even multiple times last season. And obviously that means that Tua is throwing him the ball. So he does have a ceiling to him, but I do agree with you that there's no rushing floor. There's quite a low floor to him, especially because, in that game against Denver last season, where they absolutely dominated, it was all on the ground. And when you actually look at how he performed, it actually wasn't. Oh no, the Denver game actually was still pretty well. But yeah, because a lot of the time the rushing success was what did it. Actually, when the offense would score an incredible amount of points, it wouldn't be from him necessarily. So I'm quite similar to you, that I have him at QB 14, but around the sort of range with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert that I'd be quite happy. Yeah, I don't think I feel pretty comfortable with him as my QB1. Let's move on to another quarterback. So as I mentioned, there's 3 established starters in this division for now, and then the Patriots. This was probably not the most controversial draft pick, but the most heavily debated one in advance. Is would they move out? Would they take QB3? Would they take Marvin Harrison Jr.? What would they look to do? And then in the end, they took Drake May, and they turned down a lot from the Vikings to move up to come and get Drake May. And I think the Broncos as well offered quite a significant amount to come up to get Drake May, but they decided this is the new face of the franchise. They obviously also brought in Jacoby Brissett this offseason. So with Drake May, is he on your radar at all for fantasy or 2024? Or do you think he probably ends up sitting most of the season?
I am intrigued by him, but I don't want to rely on him for fantasy. Like, I do think he sits at the start of the season, and the Patriots seem quite adamant that they're in no rush to put him in. And I can kind of see why. This team isn't great. They've got Jacoby Brissett that we know can manage, the game. Why chuck him into kind of a challenging situation if he's not ready?
Yeah.
However, I do think he is going to play at some point. They do have quite a tough start to the season. So their first kind of few games are the Bengals, the Seahawks, the Jets, San Fran, Dolphins, Texans. Yeah. That feels like quite a gauntlet to me, and I suspect they'll put Brissett in for at least those.
Yeah.
Their bye's quite late. It's not till week 14, so I doubt they wait that long. My kind of guess would maybe be week 9 when they've got the Titans. That seems kind of a bit more of a reasonable kind of team to go up against. They've got a new head coach. Will Levis is, trying to find his feet as potentially the franchise QB. So I wonder whether they chuck him in there and kind of see how things go for the rest of the season. In terms of taking him for fantasy, I would look to probably take him as an upside QB3 or maybe even QB4 in a Superflex league. But as I said, I don't want to have to rely on him. So I want to have other options available to me. Obviously, in a 1 QB league, no interest. I'll just keep him on waivers until we find out that he's going to start or, we see some promise.
Yeah, I think that is completely fair enough. And I'm probably relatively similar to you, that I definitely think he will start at some point this season. But I think they brought in Jacoby Brissett for a reason. And I don't think it was in case they don't get a quarterback, because I think they'll have known that they probably had 3 they were happy with. I am probably not interested in him for fantasy this year. I think he has a really high ceiling. I really like Drake May. He's my QB2 in this class. But I'm probably not quite so happy starting him this season, especially with the wide receiver core in front of him. I would rather, if I'm going to be taking a QB3 at that sort of range and looking at the, the sort of range that he's going in currently in best ball, I'd probably be happier with someone like Bryce Young, who's going a couple of slots after him, even taking one of the Pittsburgh Steelers, or even Daniel Jones, just someone that I'm confident is going to start out the season. Because the problem is, if you take Drake May with any sort of decent draft capital, you are just wasting a pick for the first, let's be honest, the first half of the season, at least. There's a world in which he doesn't touch your lineup until the fantasy playoffs, in which case, why did you make that pick in the first place? So I don't think I'd be drafting him in 2024, but dynasty wise, I'm very, very interested in him. Let's move on to the running back position. So this is a really nice division for running backs. So you have James Cook, you have Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, Ramondre Stevenson, but obviously the highlight of this division is Breece Hall in New York. Where does he sit in your redraft rankings? And do you think he can potentially be the running back to unseat Christian McCaffrey as RB1?
So I currently have him as the RB2. So I think it may be controversial to some because I think it's between him and Bijan, right?
Yeah.
I personally think if CMC stays healthy for the whole of the season, I don't see anybody unseating him as the RB1 still
Yeah.
at this point. However, I think Brees could certainly give him a run for his money. I know that Bijan is talented, you know, we haven't quite seen him perform as that bell cow yet in the NFL, you know, whereas I know that Brees can. He's an extra year, you know, further off his ACL. And actually, in the final 4 weeks of the 2023 fantasy season, including the playoffs, he finished as a top 3 running back in 3 of the 4 games to end the season. So, you know, clearly he's getting much better off the ACL. He's going to be there, I think, bell cow, to be honest. You know, there's a kind of hodgepodge of running backs behind him, and maybe some might get a few touches, but I don't believe he's going to, you know, give away significant kind of work to others.
Yeah.
So I have him as my running back too, and I think he could easily pay that off.
So the Jets draft was a bit weird to me that they went and drafted 2 running backs, and they were obviously the team to draft Braylon Allen. And Braylon Allen is a big old power back. He's you know, in the Derrick Henry mold. Does that worry you at all in terms of red zone work, that they went and identified a back with a specific skill set? Because Brees Hall, you know, he's a 3-down workhorse, but he's not the biggest back. He's certainly not Braylon Allen size. Does that concern you at all, that there could be sort of some touchdowns taken away from him, given that last season his issue, and one of the reasons he didn't, you know, start to threaten CMC #1 overall, was that he didn't score very many touchdowns?
Not really. You know, I think Brees Hall is a stud, you know, and I think the Jets know that Brees Hall is a stud. He was coming off his ACL injury. He was working his way back. I think that he will be much healthier this season. And yeah, fine if Braylon Allen takes a couple of touchdowns from him. You know, I just think there's so much that Brees can do. He's more explosive. You know, I think he could get these long touchdowns and things like that. You know, I think he's going to be the RB2 this season if he stays healthy. I'm not too worried about Braylon Allen. Yes, you know, he's fine, but he's not, you know, he's not in the Brees Hall kind of stratosphere, is he really? Let's face it.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. So going from sort of the elite level back all the way down to talking about value, which running back from this division do you think will end up being the biggest value in fantasy drafts this season?
There are a few that I like generally for their value. I think there's actually quite a few running backs in this division that are undervalued. But I think realistically, the guy that has got to be the biggest value, I think, is probably Jalen Wright. You know, he's currently going as a running back 42. I just don't believe that Achane and Raheem Mostert will stay healthy for the whole of the season. You know, both of them are prone to getting injured. I know Mostert was extremely healthy last season, but his previous track record was not. He's getting older now. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't have a few injuries this season. I think Jalen Wright is going to step in, you know, and take that complementary role to whichever of them goes down. So running back 42, I think he's a smash, to be honest.
I think that's completely fair. I actually drafted my first share of him the other day because I just think it's a really interesting way to put together your backfield, to not go, and I was talking about this with Blake Corum on the Rams, that you don't go, okay, we'll have one back with power and one back who's, you know, slightly skinnier and lither, and a back who's, you know, receiving out the backfield. You just go speed. We just want all of them to be fast, and we want them to be fast and small and fragile. And when one of them goes down, we'll just throw in the next one. So there definitely is a world in which Jalen Wright is kind of next guy up. We've actually both gone for rookies here. So I'm really interested in Ray Davis for the Buffalo Bills. So he was taken on day 3. If you haven't read about his story, he has a fascinating story of his path into the NFL, which involves journeys through varying orphanages and foster families and traveling all over the country to try and get a football scholarship. which is a really heartwarming story to see him now be drafted to the NFL. But he's actually he complements James Cook really well. So he's a really tough competitive runner. He can absolutely carry a pretty big workload. So it's very sort of very typical. He's the thunder to James Cook's lightning. But the thing is, for me, is when you think of where James Cook thrives, it's normally in the receiving game. And because they have Josh Allen, they don't tend to have a huge amount of checkdowns. It tends to be that Josh Allen will take off. Now, the goal line upside of any running back on the Bills offense is always going to be slightly limited because they have the best goal line back in the NFL, which is Josh Allen himself. But in terms of they changed their offensive identity a little bit towards after the bye last season, and they ran the ball significantly more. And to me, I think Ray Davis is probably a better runner than James Cook. James Cook's a way better receiver, but that's what he's known for. I think Ray Davis is a better runner. It wouldn't surprise me if the workload between the two of them ends up being much more split than people think. And when you look into where they're being drafted currently, so Ray Davis going as RB56, James Cook going all the way up at RB13. I mean, for him to produce as RB56, he only has to finish as, RB30, and you felt incredibly smart about it. You can get him right towards the back end of your draft. So I think for me that in terms of value and then upside, that's someone that is kind of, who's going, 178th overall. That's what, 14th, 15th round. You can take him right at the end as your last running back drafted. And if they come out early on and it seems like they're not using him, then you can just move on. But there's a world to me in which he kind of wins that RB2 job right in camp. Let's carry on to the wide receiver position. We're actually staying in Buffalo. So they obviously lost Stephon Diggs. They lost Gabe Davis. They've brought in a few different options. Which wide receiver in Buffalo do you think you'll be targeting in 2024?
To be honest, I'm not totally sure how this is going to play out, if I'm honest. And I suspect now that Stephon Diggs has gone, I think they're going to spread the ball out. So I don't think there's going to be like a wide receiver one on this team. I think everybody's going to either have their game or get, a percentage of the kind of ball. But yeah, I don't think there's one that's going to be like miles above the other. So for me, I'm just going with whoever's the cheapest at the moment. So interesting, which I'm kind of surprised at. Keon Coleman is the cheapest. I thought because we've just had rookie drafts, this would be rookie fever, and he would be. But apparently, according to Underdog ADP, he's the lowest at wide receiver 62. I do quite like Curtis Samuel, but he's currently the most expensive. I think he was nearly 20 spots higher. He's like the wide receiver 48 or something like that. Yeah, I don't want to pick him if he's the first guy going off the board. I'm just going to go with the cheapest one, and I'm going to see how things play out. As I say, I'm not convinced that any of them is going to be, have that Stephon Diggs wide receiver one season. I think the ball's going to be spread out, and, everybody will get a bit. But I don't think any of them will be better than flex plays, to be honest.
Yeah, I think to me this is more of a best ball thing. This is if you take Josh Allen in the second round, or if you manage to get him in the third round, take all three of them. Take Keon Coleman, take Curtis Samuel, and take Khalil Shakir, because you can get them all pretty late on and stack them for when they are the ones that go off. But yeah, I agree with you that they do kind of worry me managing to get it right, because I don't think it's going to be who's the Stephon Diggs replacement. It's going to be, who's the wide receiver one this game, and then it's going to change week on week, which is a very similar situation to in New England. So this was maybe the worst wide receiver core in the NFL last season. So you had Pop Douglas break out. Juju Smith-Schuster was obviously injured. You had Kendrick Bourne, who some people quite like, but it was really quite terrible. And they've gone out and drafted a couple. They didn't target any in free agency. Well, they didn't sign any in free agency. There were strong rumours that they were targeting Calvin Ridley, but that obviously didn't happen. Are there any wide receivers in New England that you're interested in for fantasy in 2024?
From a best ball point of view, the three kind of main ones, Pop Douglas, Jalen Polk, and Javon Baker, they're all really quite cheap. Like, I'm kind of happy to take a dart throw on any of them. So Pop Douglas is wide receiver 74, Polk is 75, and Baker's 81. So as I say, I'd be happy to take shots on any of them. I know the Patriots probably aren't going to be amazing this season, but there's no way they can be any worse than they were last season, right? So the QB play has to be better, whether they've got Brissett or whether they've got, Drake May. I think that, some of them at some point may have flex value. So I would take shots on any of them and hope that they have spike weeks on my best ball team. On my kind of managed team, not bothered, to be honest, because I don't think they're going to give me much. But on best ball, I'm happy to take shots on any of them, and they're like a super cheap stack that you can get.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I think the answer is just draft all of them. I quite like drafting Juju, actually, because he's currently going undrafted. And we've seen him finish as a wide receiver 1 before. So there's definitely some upside there. Let's finish off with the tight end position in this division. So this is quite a terrible division for tight ends. We have Dalton Kincaid all the way up at the top, who potentially could be the top fantasy producer on the Bills this season in terms of skill position players. Aside from that, there's not really a huge amount else. So Jonnu Smith signed with the Dolphins. I couldn't even tell you who the Jets starting tight end is. It might still be Tyler Conklin. And then Hunter Henry in New England. Are there any of these that you're interested in? Or is there anyone else in the division that you think potentially could be of interest?
Do you know what? I don't hate Hunter Henry, to be honest, as a real late, tight end guy. If you haven't managed to get, anybody elite and early and you're trying to kind of just fill out the room, then I would be happy to grab him, particularly on a best ball team. He's currently going as a tight end 20, so I think he will outperform that. He's a reliable tight end. We have seen it in the past, and he's actually the most experienced pass catcher on this team now at this point. So I do think he could be quite a good, reliable red zone target for Brissett or May. As I say, he's going to be touchdown dependent, but getting him super late in best ball drafts with the chance of him having spike weeks, I wouldn't hate that.
Yeah, we were talking about Hunter Henry before we started, weren't we? In terms of who you were drafting coming up, and I think Hunter Henry might be my favourite tight end 2 currently, because you can get him super late on. He's gonna have some spike weeks. He's gonna have multiple touchdown games because that's what he does. So yeah, I quite like taking him late on, but I wouldn't want him as my tight end 1. Let's move ourselves on to the NFC East. So obviously here we have the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Commanders, and the Giants. 4 very interesting teams, 4 teams that made a lot of fun moves in the offseason, aside from the Cowboys, who did absolutely nothing in the offseason. But there's been some interesting skill position changes for the other 3 teams. So let's start off with the quarterback position. We obviously have Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, and Daniel Jones. And then we've had newly brought in the second overall pick at Jaden Daniels. So there's some very interesting fancy relevancy there. Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott obviously highlighting it. And Dak Prescott was, the presumptive MVP at one point in the season last year. Jaden Daniels is a very interesting prospect for fantasy, especially. And Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones, and has managed to keep the job for now, it seems. But how would you rank these 4 for fantasy going into next season?
So for me, I have I have Jalen Hurts, I have Dak Prescott, then I have Jaden Daniels, and then Daniel Jones to finish out. I'm interested to know, Lewis, do you have the same? The ones that I would think potentially could have different to me is Dak and Jaden Daniels. They're the 2 where I was kind of, And I think like the allure of Jaden Daniels and this rookie prospect and all of this rushing, I think could potentially, move him higher. But I think Dak has been so reliable. And last
Yeah,
season he had 6 top 3 finishes, across the season. And I just think him and CD,
yeah.
I'm not ready to give up yet.
Yeah, like Dak Prescott, I think each season he ends up being a value because the Cowboys shit the bed in the postseason, and we forget how good he's been. But like I said, he was the favorite for MVP for quite a long stretch of last season, and deservedly so as well. So no, I'm exactly the same order for you. I actually think this was quite an easy ordering for me because there's a decent tier between all 4 of them. Jaden Daniels is the most interesting one to me. And let's move on to look at him more specifically. So he was a pretty polarizing prospect. And when I was scouting him, mostly looking for rookie drafts and for Dynasty, I didn't love what I saw. He's incredibly skinny. So look, no, let's start with the positives. He's a fantastic rusher. He's very accurate from the pocket. He's got tremendous upside. He throws a nice deep ball. And he can throw, to all 3 levels of the field. But the problem for me is that he's incredibly skinny, but he tries to run like he's Josh Allen. We spoke about this in our QB preview episode. He doesn't realize how skinny he is, so he gets trucked all the time. And I just worry that in the NFL, he's going to get broken. So obviously, this rushing floor in terms of drafting a rookie quarterback, like with Anthony Richardson last year, where he absolutely outscored CJ Stroud on a per game basis. He just only finished a couple of games. Do you think Jaden Daniels finishes as the highest scoring rookie quarterback in 2024?
If he stays healthy, then yes. But obviously that's a big if. And this is the risk that you've got with him, right? We know that rushing QBs, the Konami code, everybody wants them. But, he could do an Anthony Richardson and miss most of the season. And then he isn't going to finish as the top rookie QB. But I think if he stays healthy for the whole season, then yes, I could 100% see a world where he finishes as the top QB and top rookie QB in fantasy.
Yeah, and this is the problem, is that Anthony Richardson is the example that we are giving. And I'm just looking up their weights just to see when we're talking about Anthony Richardson really having trouble. So they are the exact same height, but Anthony Richardson has 35 pounds on Jaden Daniels, and Anthony Richardson couldn't stay healthy. And was taking too many hits. So if a man of that size is struggling, God, I hate to think what's going to happen to Jaden Daniels, especially with Cliff Kingsbury not managing to teach him how to slide and how to play quarterback in the NFL. So I do agree. Like, if the question was, is he going to be the top rookie quarterback in points per game? Yeah, definitely. I 100% think he will be. Is he going to play more than 6 games next season? I don't know if I take that bet. It's a worrying one for me. But let's move on to the running back position. So the big headline name here actually moved from one team in this division to another, which is Saquon Barkley. He moved from the Giants to the Eagles, and he's now behind one of the best defensive lines in football, even if they lost Jason Kelsey. Where does Saquon sit in your rankings for 2024?
So the O-line is great, isn't it? But Hurts is going to be the limiting factor, right? He is going to really affect the ceiling of Saquon this season. I'm actually really interested in the Eagles offense this year because, they got rid of their previous offensive coordinator, and now they've got the Chargers previous and Cowboys previous. And I know I can't remember his name.
It slipped my mind as well, but I know who you mean. You carry on talking and I'll look it up.
Well, I can't remember. It's annoying. Anyway, I'm interested to know if they do use the running backs more.
Kellen Moore.
Kellen Moore, that's the one. I want to know if Kellen Moore is going to use the running back more in the receiving game. And I think he might try, but I just wonder whether Hurts just doesn't want to do that. I think he either wants to run or he wants to throw it further down the field. So even if Kellen Moore wants to use him, are they going to use him more? And I'm not sure. So I'm just not totally convinced on Saquon this year. I've still got him in as a running back 1, but he is the running back 8 for me. And to me, he kind of starts the running back dead zone, really.
Yeah.
I'm not that keen on clicking him, to be honest. I'd rather probably take one of the wide receivers around there, because I'm not sure that he's going to be the Saquon, that we've always wanted him to be. And he hasn't really been that since his rookie season, has he, to be honest? I'm just not totally convinced on him this season, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm roughly similar. So I have him at RB9, and I find it a very difficult click with Saquon Barkley. I find him very difficult to draft rather than just waiting for someone else a few rounds later. But actually, when you look at his 2023, like, yeah, he had injury issues, but that's kind of been what his whole career has been. His floor isn't as high as we would want it to be. His floor is basically DeAndre Swift last season, right? But he's a better player, so there's going to be more opportunities for him to score touchdowns because of a better offensive line. Actually, missing Jason Kelsey might mean that they aren't able to run the tush push. So it might mean that there's going to be more goal line opportunities for him. There's also going to be more chance in the open field because they're going to have to do more to respect, the wide receivers and the quarterback than they were in New York. And when you actually look at his fantasy points per game last season, he finishes the RB8. So he outscored on a per game basis Jahmyr Gibbs, Rashad White, Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Bijan Robinson, Derek Henry. Like, he actually finished as a top 10 running back in points per game, which kind of surprised me. So the ceiling is definitely there. The floor is what worries me. And also, he's going into his age 27 season and he has been injured every single season except his rookie season. So that's kind of the worry, is that, as you referenced with that phenomenal rookie season, is that Saquon even still there anymore? Or are we just spending a very high draft pick on a player that hasn't really existed in the last few seasons? Um, Talking about old running backs, one of the other interesting ones this offseason was Austin Eckler ending up on the Commanders. So they obviously let Antonio Gibson walk, they kept Brian Robinson, and they brought in Austin Eckler. Which of these two would you rather have in 2024?
I have to say I'm not massively enthused about the Washington running back room this season, and I think if Jaden Daniels stays healthy, it's like we've said with Hurts, isn't it? He's a rushing QB who is going to take touches from them and probably touchdowns from them as well. So I'm not overly keen on either of them. I've actually found myself clicking Brian Robinson a few times recently, but I
Yeah,
really would not be surprised if Eckler outperforms him. I think everyone thinks that Eckler is washed, but he had a high ankle sprain right at the beginning of the season, and I just don't think he was healthy for the rest of it. And
yeah.
that offense was an absolute shit show all last season, So I actually wouldn't be surprised if he might not be the, Eckler of old, but I wouldn't be surprised if actually he does a pretty good job and he outperforms his current ADP of running back 31, and ends up being a decent running back too. That really would not surprise me if it happened. And I would like a couple of shares of him in best ball. I'm not sure I want to click him and put him on my team in a managed league. I'm just not convinced of what he's going to do, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if actually he's not quite as washed as we think.
Yeah, I completely agree that I find myself drafting quite a lot of Brian Robinson because but he's such a low ceiling. His floor and his ceiling are basically 5 spots apart. That it's what, like, RB18 to RB23 is basically where he'll finish next season. But I think with a slightly better offense, even with a rookie quarterback, but also with a small rookie quarterback, with a slender rookie quarterback, even though he's a good rusher, I can't see them using him too much in the red zone. I can't see them running too much QB sneak because he'll get snapped in half. So Brian Robinson should have a decent opportunity, and you'd imagine he'd be the goal line back. But I agree with you that Austin Eckler, like, it does worry me that I'm going to have no exposure to him and he's going to finish as a top 10 running back. I do think the upside could be there. I just think I'll let someone else take that risk. Um, So let's move on to the wide receiver position. This is a great division for wide receivers. So you obviously have CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown right at the top of the list. But I'd be really interested to know, looking at some of the other wide receivers in this division. And it's very notable that after CeeDee Lamb, there's not another Cowboy on this list, but we'll come on to this in a minute. How would you draft the following four wide receivers? So Devonta Smith, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Malik Neighbors.
So I would go Devonta Smith, Malik Neighbors, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson.
I think I'm the same. But when you bake in the cost to it, so in terms of ADP currently, I'm pretty confident that Malik Neighbors is actually going the highest out of all of these players. No, he's not. He's currently in consensus going 2 spots behind Devonta Smith. Terry McLaurin is actually the one that I'm probably the most interested in at this cost. There's other players around the same ranges that I tend to like more than Devonta Smith and Malik Neighbors, and players with kind of higher floors, let's say. Whereas Terry McLaurin, I think, is going to be the established one in the offense. And with a current ADP of wide receiver 32, I'm quite interested in him. Jahan Dotson, would you agree, probably like quite clearly the lowest of the four?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just don't think we've seen enough from him. You know, he had a decent season as a rookie, but he's struggled since, and I think we need to see it from him. And I think with a rookie quarterback, he's going to struggle again this season. So I'd rather someone else click him, you know, and potentially take that chance and maybe get something from him. And I'll get being on him again next season. But for now, not for me.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I did obviously mention the Cowboys wide receiver core. So they were slated to potentially draft a wide receiver early, and then they didn't. And then they were slated to draft maybe a wide receiver on day 2, and then they didn't. And then it took them all the way until they took Ryan Flournoy in the 7th round for them to draft a wide receiver. So behind CeeDee Lamb, they have Jalen Tolbert, they have Brandon Cooks. There's probably a swathe of other wide receivers there. But then when you look across the divisions as well, so the Giants have quite a strange wide receiver core beyond Malik Neighbors. So it's Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt as a deep threat. In the Commanders drafted Christian McCaffrey's younger brother, Luke McCaffrey, on day 2 as a wide receiver 3. I can't even remember who the Eagles' wide receiver 3 is. Is there anyone that you quite like as a sleeper at wide receiver in this division? Or do you think probably it's just going to be those elite names that we've mentioned already?
I think so, to be honest. Like Brandon Cooks, yes, he had his day, but you know, last year he didn't really do anything. Yes, he finished as a wide receiver 3 1 week. He finished as a wide receiver 2 for like 3 or 4 weeks, you know, and then the rest of the time it was like 50s, 70s, 80s. Like, I'm just not interested in that. The Giants wide receivers, I think, again, it's going to be a hodgepodge. They might get, you know, have the odd spike week. But I think realistically, this offense is probably going to run a lot through Malik Neighbors, you know, so I would much rather have Neighbors than any of the others. So I personally am not that bothered about anyone.
Yeah, I agree with you that I sort of stared at Jalen Tolbert for a while because I really liked him when he came out of college, and he did a little bit towards the end of last season. And they are going to spread. They're going to have to spread the ball around between the other wide receivers sometimes. CeeDee Lamb can't just have 20 targets a game, although maybe he can. He is that good. And I kind of stared at him for a while and went, "Am I willing to publicly on a podcast say that he's my sleeper in this division?" No, I don't think I am. I don't think I'm willing to do that. And you know that I try to go quite, you know, with my sleepers, I like them to be fast asleep. I like them to be, you know, we're shaking them, trying desperately to wake them up. But I just can't quite see it with him. So, no, I sort of agree with you that I can't quite see there being a sleeper in this division. Let's close it out with the tight ends. So there's not really a star tight end in this division. In New York, we had Darren Waller's retirement, so it's Theo Johnson or Daniel Bellinger. With the Commanders, they obviously drafted Ben Sinnott in the second round, which is quite interesting, and they still have Zach Ertz. But I'm interested in the tight ends in Dallas and Philly. So that's Jake Ferguson and Dallas Goedert. They're both in that kind of tight end dead zone, that they're not being taken that early, but they're not super late. You probably need them about the 7th or 8th round. Who of these two would you rather have in 2024?
To be honest, Lewis, I've got them both in the same tier, and actually when you look at them, they profile extremely similarly. They're both going to be touchdown dependent. They're on high-powered offenses, but they're not, the primary pass catchers. They're going to realistically be the third pass catcher. Okay, maybe Jake Ferguson might be the second in some games. But as I say, realistically, probably the third pass catcher. Last season, they actually finished as the Titan 9, which was Ferguson, and the Titan 12, which was Goddard. But obviously, he was also injured for a lot of the season. And they're currently going next to each other. So Titan 11, which is Ferguson, and Titan 12, which is Goddard, in current underdog drafts. So for me, I think it's half a dozen of one and half a dozen of the other. I would be willing to click on either of those at that point, and I think they're going to have some good spike weeks, and they're going to have some weeks where they don't do very much. And again, I think we talk about this all the time, but maybe better in best ball type of things. But I think generally the tight end position is like that. They're going to have spike weeks. They're going to have quiet weeks, unless you've got these truly elite guys that are primary pass catchers on their offenses.
Yeah, I actually quite firmly have Jake Ferguson ahead of Dallas Goedert, but I say that, and that's more in a sense of vibe than it is actually in terms of rankings, because I only have him 3 spots ahead. The difference for me with Jake Ferguson as opposed to Dallas Goedert is not who they are as players. I think they're very similar players skill-wise. It's just that Jake Ferguson obviously has CeeDee Lamb, but then he has Zeke and Rico Dowdle, Brandon Cooks, and Jalen Tolbert, right? Whereas Dallas Goedert has AJ Brown and Devonta Smith and Saquon Barkley. So there's a world in which week on week he sees the 4th most targets in the offense. Whereas to me, the path for Jake Ferguson to be the 2nd most targeted skill position player just is more clearly there. And they are quite a pass heavy offense as well. So Jake Ferguson to me, slightly ahead, but also they're not players that I'm excited to draft, and they're not players with a huge amount of upside. Quickly before we finish, and we haven't done this for any of the others, who do you think wins both divisions?
Ooh, good question. Okay, so let's have a look. AFC East, do you know what? If everything goes and falls right, I could potentially see the Jets winning the division, but everything has to fall right. And I think maybe there's too much turmoil in that team that it's not going to. There's so much coming out of there that, this is wrong and they don't like X and Y, and there's so much kind of outside noise that I'm not sure it's gonna. But I could see a world where it was the Jets. So I'm gonna punt. Take a change. Why is it always the Bills? Yawn. Let's try the Jets this season. I'm being kind to Rich.
Yeah. And
NFC.
in the NFC?
I think it's got to be the Cowboys, right? The Eagles had such an epic collapse last season. I'm still not quite back on that train. Kelsey's retired. There's been a lot of change with the coordinators, rightly, or that might actually improve things. But I don't know. I just want to see it a little bit first. I think the train came off the tracks a little bit at the end of last season, and it needs to get back on them before I can say that I'm happy. And the Cowboys are great in the regular season, so I'm going to go Cowboys. What about you?
I refuse to bet against Josh Allen, even though they've had a lot of turmoil this offseason, a lot of changes in wide receiver core. I refuse to bet against generational quarterbacks, so I will go with the Bills. I think I probably agree with the Cowboys. I was thinking Eagles, but the Cowboys, again, we get the sour taste in the mouth from the off season, but in terms of in season, they're always amazing. So I think I'll go with the Cowboys as well as you. Thank you so much for this evening, Hannah. That will bring us to the end of the show. Thank you, the listener, for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind. Head on over to our YouTube channel, search for us at Fancy Wildcard, and make sure you give us a subscribe. And come back and tune in next week, where Paul and I will be butting heads talking about the NFC West and the AFC West as well. But more importantly, the NFC West. See you next week.
Take me back to the sun.